Welcome back, everyone. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to take better photos off-road. Now let's get into it. All right, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is composition. I think this part is very important as a starting point for a great photo. The composition is how the photo is laid out. I usually like to keep the subject in the center of the frame, but typically you're gonna break up the photo into a grid. And I'll show that on screen right now. And you can use that grid to kind of plan out the photo and use the rule of thirds. So typically what I'd like to do first is take a step back and just look at the vehicle and look at the surroundings and see how you want it to look. What kind of story are you trying to tell through this photo? Because ultimately that's what you're trying to do, is tell a story, make people feel like they were there without being there. And for me, I usually like to keep the vehicle in the center of the frame. Don't get too tight in on the vehicle. I find a lot of people just have the edges, they just crop in right on the vehicle. And first of all, it's kind of hard to tell where the vehicle is, what's going on, and there's no breathing room. I want that breathing room around the photo, okay? So that's kind of the basics on composition. I'm sure there's a lot of other videos just talking about that. I could go on, but that was step number one. So the second tip is shooting in manual mode. This comes with some practice, of course, adjusting your exposure, your ISO, and your aperture. Typically, I like to leave the shutter speed 1/200th or faster. You can go down a little bit lower, especially if you want to take rolling shots of the vehicle from another car. Then you could go like 1/80th or 1/60th. Obviously, the slower, the more steady you're going to have to be. And with ISO, you always want to keep it as low as possible. So 100, maybe crank it up a little bit, but try not to go too high because that's where noise starts to come into the photo. And then aperture, you can play around. A low aperture such as 1.8 on a 50mm, which is the lens I'm using now, is ideal for getting a shallow depth of field. So obviously the lower the aperture, 1.8, I shoot up to like 4, f4, gives you a shallower depth of field, which really brings your eyes towards the subject. And of course, higher aperture, you can bring in the background more if you want to show the mountains or something behind the vehicle. But I'll show you some examples on screen of a low aperture at 1.8 on this lens, a 50mm, and I think they look great. Not only do they look great, but it's an affordable lens at only $200 or $300. And you can use that on a crop sensor or a DSLR, mirrorless camera, it doesn't matter. Obviously, you need to buy the corresponding lens for that camera. So number 3 is talking more about shallow depth of field, and that's kind of how you can get that high quality look, but at a pretty affordable price depending on what lens you choose. You could get a 35mm 1.8 or 1.4, or a 50mm, or if you step up to an 85mm or higher, not only are you getting a shallow depth of field from the low aperture, but you're also getting compression from that long focal length. Now, I can go more into depth on these topics, or you can search them up yourself. Obviously, talking about compression and focal lengths and apertures can be a bit overwhelming, but just know that the portrait mode on your iPhone is basically doing that. It's creating that shallow depth of field, and it's isolating the vehicle kind of from the background. So tip number 4 would be to get creative and practice. Try different shots in different locations. Still at this point, I've been shooting for 7 years, and I go out a couple times a week in the evening just to keep practicing and try different locations, scout locations that you could share with your friends. This could be off-road or just outside the city or in the city or downtown. Practicing near your house lets you be better on the trails when you're taking photos, because often you want to be on the trails off-roading, not just taking photos. So if you can hone your craft, maybe closer to your house, then that pays off when you're off-roading and trying to take amazing photos. This also goes for how you're showing an obstacle that you're getting up. I'll show a photo that Matt took. He got a beautiful wide shot, and it really did a great job at showing the height. Obviously, it's not gonna be as great as if you were there in person. Move around the vehicle and see at what angle does this obstacle look the most realistic in the camera lens as it would look in your eyes. So the next tip is to find the right light. I find, obviously, if you're off-roading during the day, it's very harsh light because the sun is right overhead. But my one tip would be, if you're going to try to strive to take better photos off-road or just in general, to shoot earlier in the morning or later at night, later in the evening when the sun is not as harsh. Ways to bypass this would be to try to shoot in the shadows during the day, maybe the mountains casting a shadow or big trees casting a shadow, and this kind of avoids that harsh light on the vehicle. The next tip would be to learn how to edit your photos. This can be as simple as editing it in the Photos app on your phone, but I would urge you to try and get Lightroom Mobile if you're just using a phone, or get Lightroom on your computer if you're shooting with a DSLR or a mirrorless camera. And make sure that you're shooting RAW, because this allows you to have much more flexibility when you're editing, because your camera takes in a lot more data when it takes the photo if you're shooting in RAW. Just look up your camera, see how to do it if you're not already shooting in RAW, and that's when the creativity really flows, is the editing process. I find that almost more fun than taking the photos. I think a good starting point is even buying some Lightroom presets from people, and it creates a good base to go off of. You can kind of see their style and what they were thinking. They go a little bit farther in depth than just the first couple things you can adjust in Lightroom. You can learn a lot from buying those presets, and they're not very expensive. I think they're 20 or 25 bucks, but they'll really elevate your photo game and they'll teach you how to edit better. And obviously those guys have tutorials on using their presets. So I might release some myself, but for now, you can go find some or just start using Lightroom and start experimenting. All right, so just a few more points I wanted to touch on. If you want some action shots or rolling shots, you're gonna need a buddy. Preferably let them drive your vehicle, because you're trying to take better photos and you want to practice, right? So get your buddy to drive the vehicle so you can get some great action shots of your rig, and really experiment. Try different angles and get creative. That's the biggest thing, is you gotta practice and you gotta get creative if you want to take better photos and maybe have photos that don't look like everyone else's photo. All right, so thanks for watching. Those are some of my quick tips. I can do more videos with more tips in the future if you like this video. I'm gonna have a lot more trail videos coming up. A lot more trails open up near me on May 1st. So I'm excited for that. I've been getting a little tired of doing some of the same trails, and it keeps snowing here. It's snowing right now as I'm filming this video, and it snowed last night, and it's almost May. So I can't wait to get out and share that with you guys. But until the next one, take it easy.